Good evening, I'm Chevy Chase, and you're not.
So I invented Weekend Update so I could look in the camera.
Hello. Hello.
In February 2025, Saturday Night Live celebrated its 50th anniversary. Legends returned. Original cast members were honored, but Chevy Chase wasn't invited on stage. The man who defined Weekend Update, the show's first breakout star, was left in the audience while Bill Murray and others took the spotlight. For someone who helped build SNL into a cultural icon, it was a silent, brutal reminder. Talent is remembered, but controversy never forgets. How did it all come to this? The Golden Boy. Cornelius Crane Chase was born on October 8, 1943, into wealth and privilege. His family had connections to the Vanderbilt through his mother's side. His father, Ned Chase, was a prominent book editor. By all appearances, young Chevy had been born with every advantage. But appearances can be devastatingly deceptive. Chevy's parents divorced when he was 4 years old, and he went to live with his mother, Kathleen. What happened in that house would shape everything that came after: the humor, the anger, and self-destruction. Kathleen was cruel in ways that are hard to fathom. She would wake young Chevy up in the middle of the night and slap him repeatedly in the face without explanation. Once, when he was 14 and got into trouble at school, she locked him in the basement for several days with only a pitcher to use as a bathroom. This was the childhood of a man who would grow up to make millions of people laugh. Chevy learned early that humor was survival. If you could make people laugh, maybe they wouldn't hurt you. If you could be funny enough, charming enough, maybe you could hide the pain underneath. Comedy became his armor, his weapon, his way of keeping the world at arm's length. He bounced between expensive private schools, Riverdale Country School, Haverford College, getting expelled from both. He was brilliant, but lacked focus. Talented, but undisciplined. He played drums and keyboards well enough that he was almost recruited to join the band that would become Steely Dan. But music wasn't where his future lay. In the early 1970s, Chevy found his calling. He began writing for the Smothers Brothers and National Lampoon, honing a sharp, irreverent style of comedy. He joined the New York comedy video workshop, Channel 1, which evolved into the 1974 film The Groove Tube. He was building something, brick by brick, joke by joke. How did a troubled kid with a sharp tongue turn pain into comedy and accidentally create a monster Hollywood would later regret enabling? The Meteoric Rise. In 1975, a young television producer named Lorne Michaels was developing a new kind of sketch comedy show. It would be live, it would be dangerous, and it would break all the rules. He needed writers and performers who could match that energy. Someone told him about Chevy Chase. Saturday Night Live debuted on October 11, 1975, and Chevy Chase became its first breakout star. He was hired as a writer, but Michaels quickly realized Chevy was too talented to keep behind the scenes. He became the anchor of Weekend Update, the show's fake news segment, opening with a catchphrase that became iconic. "Good evening, I'm Chevy Chase, and you're not." The line was perfect, confident, cocky, funny, and just a little bit mean. It was Chevy in 8 words. His impersonation of President Gerald Ford turned him into a household name. Chevy seized on Ford's occasional stumbles, like his 1975 trip on the Air Force One steps, and amplified them into a comedy persona of a bumbling, clumsy president. It was comedy as character exaggeration, and America loved it. Chevy won Emmy Awards for both his writing and acting. He was on magazine covers. He was the star everyone wanted to work with, the comedian everyone wanted to be. In just one season, he became the most famous person on television. And then he left. After only one season on Saturday Night Live, Chevy Chase quit to pursue a movie career. It was 1976, and he was convinced he was destined for bigger things. The show had made him famous, but he wanted to be a movie star. His castmates were stunned. SNL was just getting started, and their breakout star was abandoning them. But Chevy didn't see it that way. He saw an opportunity, and he took it. The decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. Years later, he would call leaving SNL after one season a mistake. But in 1976, riding high on success and confidence, he thought he was making the smartest move of his career. For a while, it seemed like he was right. But success has a way of revealing who you really are. And what it revealed about Chevy Chase was ugly. The height of fame. By the late 1970s and early 80s, Chevy Chase was untouchable. He became one of the biggest comedy stars in Hollywood, commanding enormous salaries and starring in film after film. Foul Play made him a box office star. Caddyshack turned him into a cult icon, and National Lampoon's Vacation cemented Clark Griswold as a comedy legend. Christmas Vacation alone guaranteed him eternal holiday royalties. Fletch showed off his sharp improvisation. Three Amigos proved he could play well with other comedy heavyweights. And by the mid-80s, he was hosting the Oscars and cashing checks as one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors. He had everything. And somehow, that was the beginning of the problem. Behind the scenes, something was rotting. The question is, when did success turn into self-destruction? The burning bridges. Here's the thing about Chevy Chase. Almost everyone who worked with him has a horror story. Bill Murray replaced Chevy on Saturday Night Live after he left, and the two developed an intense rivalry. When Chevy returned to host SNL in 1978, he and Murray got into a backstage fistfight, exchanging insults and blows before being separated. The tension between them lasted for years, though they eventually reconciled enough to work together on Caddyshack. But the Bill Murray blow-up was just the opening act. Every time Chevy Chase returned to Saturday Night Live, the same stories followed him in. Insults, inappropriate comments, a vibe so tense it sucked the air out of the room. In 1985, he reportedly mocked Robert Downey Jr. about his father's death, crossing a line so blatant it left people stunned. By 1997, the goodwill was gone. After a week of what cast members described as abusive behavior, Chevy slapped Cherry O'Terry during dress rehearsal and brushed it off as a joke. Will Ferrell went straight to Lorne Michaels. That was the end. Chevy Chase was banned from hosting, one of several performers who've been barred from returning to Studio 8H, though his ban remains among the most infamous. And once that door closed, others followed. Directors refused to work with him. Chris Columbus was signed to direct National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, but quit after meeting Chevy. Former colleagues didn't mince words either. Terry Sweeney called him a monster. Will Ferrell labeled him the worst host. Pete Davidson later called him not a nice man, referencing the racist incidents from Community. The reputation solidified. Chevy Chase was talented, yes, but he was also cruel, mean-spirited, and impossible to work with. By then, the verdict was in. The talent was undeniable, but the reputation was radioactive. And once Hollywood decides you're the problem, how fast does the fall really begin? The slow decline. The 1990s were ruthless to Chevy Chase. Movies flopped one after another. Nothing But Trouble, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, Cops and Robertsons, all bombs at the box office. His late-night talk show in 1993, canceled after 5 weeks. Hollywood had moved on. New comedians like Jim Carrey, Adam Sandler, Ben Stiller were taking over, and either there was no room for Chevy, or no one wanted to be in the room with him. Behind the cameras, the spiral continued. Prescription painkillers, heavy drinking, the pressure of fading fame, and old wounds from childhood. They all brewed into a storm he couldn't escape. Comebacks like Man of the House and Vegas Vacation barely made a ripple. Then, in 2009, Community appeared. NBC's new sitcom promised a lifeline, a chance to reinvent himself as Pierce Hawthorne, the wealthy, out-of-touch study group member. Instead, it turned into a masterclass in public self-destruction. And the question lingered: how does someone with a second chance manage to burn it so spectacularly? The final meltdown. Chevy Chase's time on Community started as a comeback and unraveled almost immediately. He clashed with creator Dan Harmon from day one. He hated the writing, resented the ensemble format, and bristled at not being the star. In his 60s and struggling for relevance, Chevy was suddenly just another cast member, and it showed. Everything exploded in 2012. According to multiple accounts from those present, a dispute over a script involving an offensive hand puppet storyline spiraled out of control. During the argument, Chevy reportedly used the N-word while questioning where his character was headed. It wasn't directed at anyone, but it didn't matter. Yvette Nicole Brown reportedly walked off set, and the atmosphere turned radioactive. Chevy denied wrongdoing, but the damage was immediate. Director J. Chandrasekhar later recalled Chevy storming onto the set, shouting that his career was ruined and lashing out at everyone around him. After that night, Chevy never truly returned. He exited after season 4, with only a brief cameo later. His relationship with Harmon was so broken that Harmon publicly cursed him at a rap party, followed by a profanity-filled voicemail Chevy left that quickly leaked. Donald Glover would later reflect that Chevy seemed to be fighting against time itself, struggling to accept that his reign had ended. It wasn't said with malice. It came across as an observation filled with sadness rather than judgment. After alienating an entire industry, what happens when your own body finally forces you to stop? The near-death experience. In 2021, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Chevy Chase's health nearly claimed his life. He was hospitalized for 5 weeks due to what was initially reported as undisclosed heart issues. The truth, revealed in the 2025 documentary, was far more serious. Chevy experienced near-fatal heart failure. His heart stopped. Doctors diagnosed him with cardiomyopathy, a weakening of the heart muscles caused by years of heavy drinking. They made the decision to put him into a medically induced coma for 8 days, hoping his body could recover. His daughter, Chevy Chase, recalled the horror. He has basically come back from the dead. He had heart failure. The doctor had warned us, we might not get him back. We don't know how present he'll be. Prepare yourselves for the worst. For 8 days, Chevy Chase lay in a coma, his family not knowing if he would wake up or what condition he'd be in if he did. When he finally woke, he couldn't walk. He had cognitive issues. His memory was damaged. The man who had destroyed so many relationships, who had burned so many bridges, was now facing his mortality with permanent damage to his mind. Throughout the documentary, when confronted with his past behavior, the fights on SNL, the controversies on Community, Chevy repeatedly said he didn't remember. Whether that's the truth or a convenient excuse, we'll never know. But even surviving death didn't bring the redemption arc you'd hope for. What does Hollywood do when it's time to honor the past? The final snub. In February 2025, Saturday Night Live marked its 50th anniversary with a massive televised celebration. Original cast members were honored. Legends returned to the stage. The show reflected on 5 decades of cultural dominance. Chevy Chase was there. He was seated in the audience. And that was as far as it went. When Weekend Update was spotlighted, Bill Murray appeared. Other anchors from across the show's history were acknowledged and applauded. But the very first Weekend Update anchor, the man who helped define the segment's tone and structure, never made it to the stage. In the accompanying documentary, Chevy later acknowledged that the omission stung and that he had expected to be included alongside his former castmates. Instead, no invitation ever came. Lorne Michaels would later explain that there had been concerns about Chevy's focus and reliability, a careful way of acknowledging what had followed him for decades. The message was unmistakable. Chevy Chase wasn't erased. He wasn't formally banned. He was simply deemed too risky to feature during one of the most important nights in the show's history. For someone who helped build Saturday Night Live into what it became, the exclusion said everything. How does the man who helped build Saturday Night Live end up sidelined at its biggest celebration? And what does that say about the behavior Hollywood never really forgave? The tragedy explained. Here's what makes Chevy Chase's story genuinely heartbreaking. The damage started early. The abuse he endured as a child, the beatings, humiliation, and cruelty shaped everything that followed. Comedy became his coping mechanism, a way to survive the pain. But the healing never really happened. Friends later admitted they were stunned when they learned about his upbringing. The polished prep school image hid a childhood defined by hardship, not privilege. And in an industry that often rewards confession and growth, Chevy never fully confronted that past. He could have done the work, acknowledged the impact, and broken the cycle. Instead, he repeated it, directing the same cruelty outward that had once been directed at him. Substance abuse only deepened the damage. Prescription painkillers and alcohol became tools for self-medication, masking pain he never addressed head-on. By the time he entered rehab in 1986, and again decades later, the patterns were already deeply entrenched. At the core of it all was insecurity. Despite enormous success, Chevy never seemed convinced he was enough. He left Saturday Night Live after one season out of fear of being just another cast member. Years later, on Community, he struggled watching younger performers outshine him. Not being the center of attention was something he simply couldn't tolerate. He also came from a different era of comedy, one where outrageous behavior was often excused and offensive lines were crossed without consequence. But the world changed, and Chevy didn't change with it. He stayed frozen in a version of himself the industry had already moved past. And that's what makes it all so sad. Beneath the reputation and the damage, there were flashes of the human being still trying to connect. Even after surviving a coma, humor was his instinctive response. When Chevy finally woke from his coma, there was a brief moment that reassured his family he was still himself. As a nurse explained a medical procedure, Chevy instinctively responded with a crude joke. Even at death's door, the comedian's reflex was still intact. But humor isn't healing. Talent isn't growth. And being funny doesn't undo the impact done along the way. The legacy. So what is Chevy Chase's legacy? He's still responsible for some of the most iconic comedy in American history. Clark Griswold is a character that will be watched and quoted for generations. Caddyshack is a masterpiece. His work on Saturday Night Live helped create the template for late-night comedy that still exists today. But he's also a cautionary tale about what can happen when trauma goes unaddressed, when pain hardens instead of healing, and when being funny starts to feel like armor instead of art. At 82 years old, Chevy Chase is alive, relatively healthy despite his health scare, and living quietly with his wife Janie, whom he married in 1982. They have 3 daughters. He appears occasionally in minor roles. He attends events. He does interviews for documentaries about his life. But he's no longer the star. He's no longer the golden boy who had the world at his feet. He's the man who had everything and lost it, not to tragedy or circumstance, but to his own inability to be kind. The authorized documentary about his life carries the title, "I'm Chevy Chase and You're Not," a callback to his most famous catchphrase. Decades later, it no longer sounds like swagger. It reads more like distance, even isolation. He's still Chevy Chase, but nobody wants to be him anymore. And that might be the saddest part of all. When the laughter fades. The tragedy of Chevy Chase is that it didn't have to be this way. He had the talent. He had the opportunities. He had people who wanted to help him, who wanted to work with him, who wanted to see him succeed. But he pushed them all away. He burned bridges faster than he could build them. He confused cruelty with confidence, meanness with humor. And by the time he realized what he'd lost, it was too late to get it back. His story is a reminder that childhood trauma doesn't excuse adult cruelty. That success without self-awareness is hollow. That being the funniest person in the room doesn't mean anything if you're also the cruelest. It's also a reminder that comedy comes from pain. But pain doesn't have to create more pain. That you can survive terrible things without becoming terrible yourself. That healing is possible if you're willing to do the work. Chevy Chase never seemed able to do that work. And now, late in life, his legacy exists in tension, defined as much by what he damaged as by what he created. When Chevy woke from that 8-day coma in 2021, he was given a second chance at life. He survived when doctors thought he might not. But survival isn't the same as redemption, and waking up isn't the same as changing. The real tragedy of Chevy Chase is that he was given every opportunity to be better, and he chose not to take them. He was given talent, fame, success, second chances, even a near-death experience that could have transformed him. And he remained, fundamentally, the same person who left Saturday Night Live after one season thinking he was too good for it. He was Chevy Chase, and we weren't. But as it turns out, that wasn't the compliment he thought it was. So where do you land? Tragic figure? Cautionary tale? Or someone who simply ran out of chances? Drop your take in the comments. And for more stories Hollywood would rather forget, make sure you're subscribed.